Welcome to Treasure Mountain, the podcast that inspires and guides us to find the treasure within human experience. I'm your host, Saul Hannah. Joining us on this episode is a humble yet trailblazing monk from the forest tradition lineage of Ajahn Chah, who is now the senior-most bhikkhu at Abhayagiri Buddhist Monastery in California. I'm speaking, of course, of the Venerable Ajahn Pasanno. Ajahn Pasanno took ordination in Thailand in 1974 with Venerable Phra Khru Ñāṇasirivatana as a preceptor. During his first year as a monk, he was taken by his teacher to meet Ajahn Chah, with whom he asked to be allowed to stay and train. One of the early residents of Wat Pah Nanachat, Ajahn Pasanno became its abbot in his 9th year. During his incumbency, Wat Pah Nanachat developed considerably, both in physical size and reputation. Spending 24 years living in Thailand, Ajahn Pasanno became well-known and highly respected monk and Dhamma teacher. He moved to California on New Year's Eve in 1997 to share the abbotship of Abhayagiri with Ajahn Amaro. In 2010, Ajahn Amaro accepted an invitation to serve as abbot of Amaravati Buddhist Monastery in England, leaving Ajahn Pasanno to serve as the sole abbot of Abhayagiri for the next 8 years. In spring of 2018, Ajahn Pasanno stepped back from the role of abbot and now serves as the guiding elder for the community. Now, I have a quick note for listeners. I had a lot of problems with delayed echoes across the original recording. I did a lot of editing to remove that echo, and I believe I've removed all of that which can be removed without changing the flow of the interview. I think it's turned out quite well, but there are a few points at which we have echo or less than optimal audio. In any case, I think that this is a really interesting interview in which one of the most senior Western disciples of Ajahn Chah reflects upon a life and the changing times as Buddhism comes to the West. I hope you all enjoy this interview with Ajahn Pasanno. Ajahn Pasanno, welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us. How are you today?
Very good, thank you. Good to be here.
Look, I'd like to get stuck into understanding your early life. I believe you grew up in Manitoba in Canada, up in the north of Manitoba indeed. And I was wondering what it was like growing up in such an isolated place and whether this influenced you towards a spiritual, philosophical inquiry from a young age.
I don't know that it influenced me other than drove me to it. Northern, it was about 600 miles north of the American border, small town, pretty rough. I was really, and not much spiritual kind of examples, really. So that I think it ignited, certainly in me, it ignited a kind of a yearning.
So you felt like you just wanted to get away and maybe see the world, or did you feel like
Yes,
there must be something different?
Yeah, exactly. I would say there's got to be something more than this.
Yeah. Okay. Right. After you grew up and you went to college in Winnipeg, you travelled around the world and ended up in Thailand. What set you off on this journey around the world?
Well, it was both a yearning for something other than than what I grew up with, and even what I was found at university, just sort of looking for something. And but then even when I was at university, I did get introduced to Buddhism. I did. I took courses in religion, a couple courses, and that really stimulated my interest and Eastern religion. But what really stood out to me was Buddhism. And then I started reading, and there was I really never ever found a place to learn meditation or anybody who was meditating. It was really just from the books. And so I did mostly, and in those days, most of the books were about Japanese Zen. So I formulated an idea in my mind that I would like to go to Japan and study Buddhism, because that was the main thing that I came across in my readings. Although I did read about Theravada Buddhism, I did read about Tibetan Buddhism, but the most popular thing in those days, because that was late 60s, was and into early 70s. The most popular thing was Zen, and it did have an express inclination to meditation, and that seemed, and intuitively I was drawn to the meditation element. But of course, I mean, if I really wanted to go really quickly, if I were really motivated, I could have gone from Vancouver to Japan, but I didn't. I went the long way around and started in Europe and traveled through Europe, Middle East, India, Nepal, overland.
And you never did make it to Japan. You stopped at Thailand.
I still haven't made it.
So why Thailand? What was that attracted you when you went to Thailand?
Well, one, you just had to pass through Thailand, and I didn't really know anything about Thailand. I didn't really know that it was a Buddhist country even, and but then you get there, and it's obvious that Buddhism is everywhere, and then the elements of the society and culture that I found really attractive, and the just the kind of warmth of the people and easygoing nature of the culture. It's just the major conditioning influence in their here is is Buddhism. So I should study Buddhism. And then, there were monasteries everywhere, and I started checking and asking, and there was opportunities to learn about meditation.
Did you go on a retreat there, or because you ended up ordaining in Bangkok? How did that all come about?
I did. I did go on a retreat. My introduction to meditation was a 1 month long Mahasi Sayadaw kind of intensive, sort of in a room by myself for 18 hours.
That's pretty intense.
Yeah, it was, and but I loved it. So I felt really drawn. I felt this is something I really can explore and really have to explore. So then I went to, and I had to, where I did this retreat was up in the north of Thailand, and I had to go back down to to Bangkok because of some embassy business for a passport. I had to renew my passport. So I was there. I'd heard about a monastery in the outskirts of Bangkok that had a very good English library, as well as a meditation section as a part of the monastery. So I went there and studying, meditating. And then the monks, after a while, seeing me sort of practicing and staying there, they kind of said, "Well, why not ordain? Are you going to ordain?" And I said, "No, I couldn't ordain. I couldn't live like this for the rest of my life." And which was my assumption from, say, like from Catholic tradition. But then they said, "Oh no, in Thailand you don't need to ordain for for your whole life. You can just do it for a short period of time of a few months, if you like. That's ordinary for Thai men to do that." So then I thought, "Oh, a few months, I can do that." And
Mm.
so that was the extent of my commitment. And so then I took that ordination, and they didn't really give me any training. But then I started hearing about the forest monasteries especially in the northeast of Thailand, and then heard about Ajahn Chah, and it was that really piqued my interest.
So, how did it come to be that you ended up with Ajahn Chah? And what was it like that first time that you met Ajahn Chah?
Well, the first time I met Ajahn Chah was really intimidating because I was really newly ordained. My teacher at where I took ordination encouraged me to go up. He says, "Ajahn Chah is a very good teacher. Go up and pay respects and spend a bit of time." So then I did. I took his suggestion, went up there, and I arrived, and you pay respects to the senior monk, the teacher, when you arrive. So I did that, and then Ajahn Chah just kind of looked at me, with no real expression, and then he just said, "If you want to stay here, you have to stay at least 5 years."
Well, what was your reaction to that? It's a bit intimidating.
Oh, yeah, that was intimidating. Yeah, exactly. 5 years, 5 years. I'm in my early 20s. I mean, 5 years is the rest of your life.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And so I just couldn't quite get my mind around that, even though I did love the monastery and the him as a teacher and the kind of community and the example of the lay community as well. I mean, there just seemed to be such sincerity that I was really drawn to it. But yeah, just that idea of a long-term commitment was just too much. So I left after a month, and then
Right.
I went and stayed in it was a small meditation monastery in central Thailand, and the teacher there he taught a particular method. He was quite well known at the time. He had a few Western disciples, so I wasn't too strange. And he did have a monk who could do some translation. An Indian monk could translate his teachings. So I stayed there and practiced. Although at the early few months of that, then he wasn't there so much. He was back and forth. He was in the process of kind of winding down a monastery that he had lived at as a teacher for a while, and he was building his own place. So I was in this new, quite small place. So it was very quiet. It was out in the countryside. And I was able to do a lot of practice, and I really enjoyed it. And then I was there for longer and longer. Then I just kept thinking of Ajahn Chah, that I've got to go back. I've got to go back and give myself to Ajahn Chah. 5 years is 5 years. You've got to do it.
Wow. Yeah. That's a big decision for such a young man as well. And I think Westerners, we don't necessarily like the idea of committing, certainly not for life, Yeah.
Oh, commitment is anathema,
Yeah. We want to go and have a good time. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's quite natural at that age. That's what one, that's what one is drawn to. But the pull to the example of Ajahn Chah and example of the monastics in the monastery. That really pulled me.
So you went back to Ajahn Chah and Wat Pah. Were there any memories from that period of training with Ajahn Chah that really stand out in your mind?
Well, I mean, one is just how difficult it was.
Yeah, right. In what way? In what way? Some people who are listening may not know. In what ways did you find it
well, I mean,
quite
in
difficult?
those days, that was the early 70s, so that conditions were very austere. The northeast of Thailand is it's the poorest part of Thailand. And so that, conditions were very austere. There just wasn't, like oftentimes you wouldn't have flashlights for your battery to go back and forth from your dwelling place in the forest. You have to, at night it's dark, and it's tropical nights. They get really dark, and it's in the forest. And sometimes there would be batteries, and sometimes there wouldn't. Sometimes there'd be candles, and sometimes there wouldn't. So just basic things were. Sometimes you'd get, you go to the store to get, say, something like a bar of soap for bathing, and the store's monk would be cutting bars of soap in half so that each monk could get some. Conditions were quite simple. The food in the northeast of Thailand is not abundant, especially in those days. Over time, then there was much more of a gardens and far more vegetables being grown, and a lot more of the just basics were more available at the time. The economy was being developed. And also besides the kind of the physical conditions, say, like, I never saw such a thing as a zafu until, like a cushion to sit meditation on for years and years.
Yeah.
You just sit on the floor. All of the Northeasterners, they grow up on the floor, so they're comfortable sitting on the floor. And it was that, as a Westerner with a body that not very flexible, had to just that physical hardship. And then there was a rigorous schedule at times. So that was, but it was, the thing is you're young, and it's all a challenge. So it was yes, it was difficult, but it was also very satisfying. It felt like really exactly what I wanted to be doing and should be doing.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because it was there were quite a few Westerners that went to train with Thailand at the time. Not all of them made it. What got you through that period of time? What kept you going?
Well, I think probably certainly a trust in Ajahn Chah, but then also an increasing trust and confidence in the efficacy of the teachings. That this was a really true teaching that really pointed to a way of peace and freedom. So it was a confidence in both in the teacher as well as the teachings themselves being firmly grounded in truth.
I'd like to move forward to when in the early 80s, you became the abbot of Wat Pah Nanachat, which, for those who don't know, was a branch monastery of Ajahn Chah's Wat Nong Papong, which catered to Western bhikkhus. How did you come to be abbot of Wat Pah Nanachat?
What is it? A series of unfortunate circumstances?
I was going to ask. I was not 9 reigns.
Yeah, it was very, very young at the time. Although in those days, we were all reasonably, like when Ajahn Sumedho became the abbot. I mean, he was just going into his 9th year as well. But it was more. I mean, in those days there were a few more senior monks around, but then it was when Ajahn Chah, and that's when it was right at the time when Ajahn Chah was leaving to go to. He'd gotten permission from Ajahn Chah, but the group in Perth, Western Australia, had got Ajahn Chah's blessing that he would send, say, like Ajahn Chah with one other monk to go, and so that first monk who went was a monk called Puriso, who went for a year, and then Ajahn Brahm went after that. But anyway, Ajahn Chah was leaving, and he had been the abbot of Wat Nanachat, and so then Ajahn Chah. I was out at a kind of a remote branch monastery along the border of Laos. I'd spent the rains retreat there, and I absolutely loved it. It was a huge forest, about 1,000-acre forest that still had plenty of wild animals, and it was in a reservoir from a power dam, and so it's very beautiful conditions, and I found it very conducive to meditation. So I was making plans to stay, which, you should never make too many plans as a monk. And then a letter came to the abbot telling me this after the rains retreat, telling me to go back to Wat Nanachat to prepare to take on the duties of abbot of Wat Nanachat because Ajahn Chah was going to be leaving. So that it was Ajahn Chah's initiative, and I mean, it wasn't a request. It was sort of he let me know that's what I was going to be doing.
Gosh, that's a huge change. And I think coming from a Western culture, we're not used to that idea that you're going to get ordered, more or less, to do something. How did you feel? How did you feel about it?
Well, I felt terrified.
Right.
The idea of taking on that responsibility, having that duty, and I felt I felt that Ajahn Chah. I also felt that if Ajahn Chah felt I couldn't do it, he wouldn't ask me to do it.
True.
So, because I had a lot of trust in him, and felt that he really understood human nature and understood us as human beings. So I had that. I had the confidence that he knew what he was doing. I didn't have the confidence that I knew what I was doing. Yeah. But I felt, okay, I think I can, we'll just have to make this work.
It worked out really well, though, in the sense that under your leadership, Wat Nanachat grew in size. there was more monks coming to practice there?
Yeah, I think I did okay.
It's very modest.
It's very modest.
Did you want to say anything else about that?
Well, it was just the that sense of right at the timing was also when Ajahn Chah was becoming quite ill. So it was a period when he was getting more sick, and so on a certain level, it wasn't a negotiable situation, because it was I don't want to bother him or put too much onto his plate, because his health was really falling apart at the time.
Right.
So I think, okay, I got to do it. So.
Yeah, and when Ajahn Chah did pass away, you were quite involved in the funeral as well. So that's quite a big position of trust, because I believe, I heard 1 million Thai people came and visited during the funeral period.
Yes, I mean, the funeral period was quite long. But yes, there were, just on the actual day of the funeral, there was about somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000 people.
It's incredible.
And then over that period of the funeral, people were streaming in from all over the country, but we did. One of the things that we did, it started probably 4 or 5 years before Ajahn Chah passed away, was we said, Ajahn Chah is not going to get better, and there's going to be a funeral, and it's going to be huge. We've got to start figuring out how to make this work. So there was a lot of planning that went into developing the infrastructure to receive that situation. Although I think none of us could have conceived of how big it was going to be. But one of the things I did do, and I talked with a couple of the senior monks and said, we should really take a group of senior monks up. There was a very senior disciple of Ajahn Mun who passed away, very respected, and his funeral was taking place. I said, we should go up and observe that to see what we can learn from that. And what we learned was that we had to be organized, because it was chaos. And then everybody came back with a real strong consensus that, okay, we've got to do something that would honor Ajahn Chah, and having a chaotic funeral ceremony happen is not a dedication to all of his goodness.
And how do you feel it went?
I would, of course, I know all the things that went wrong, but
of course.
But in terms of overall, it was absolutely magical. And it really was able to provide an atmosphere of peace and faith, and introducing teachings and practice to so many people. I mean, just the right around the time of the actual cremation, there were about 5,000 to 6,000 monks living in Wat Pah. about 1,000 nuns, and then a little over 10,000 lay people actually camped out in the monastery, and we were able to provide toilets and showers and food for everybody. As soon as you walked in the monastery, there was no monetary exchange for anything. And we had
that's just incredible.
Books for free distribution for everybody who wanted them. We had, and I remember we had, it wasn't quite opened yet. And I think there was about 45 kitchens that were volunteer. People had volunteered, different groups and communities volunteered to have free kitchens, and they would serve different things and make it available to everybody. And we a bunch of us who were the organizers, we came up with the idea that it'd be really good for everybody to keep the 8 precepts, and then to make it easier on the kitchens. They just need to provide food in the morning, and then there just need to be some drinks in the afternoon. And we sort of let people know that's what we're thinking. And then we had, by that evening, we had a protest march coming down from all the kitchens coming up to meet us. And so, no way are we not going to there's going to be people coming day and night, and they should be receiving food.
So you had to give in.
They should be looked at. Yeah, we had to give in. It was sort of this. It's that wasn't negotiable.
That's incredible. I'd like to move on and just ask a little bit more about your time as abbot of Wat Pah Nanachat. One of the things you're involved in was a model reforestation project. How did this come about, and what motivated you to promote reforestation in Thailand?
Well, I was a forest monk living in a forest, and
True.
So, and you go around to different monasteries, branch monasteries, and that was at a time of really rapid transition, and even on the end of quite a rapid transition of Thailand turning from a very rural agrarian economy to a more of trying to get an international economy going that had something but part of that was built on agriculture, and that was cash crops, and a lot of forests were completely cut down just for the cash crops of sugarcane or tapioca or jute products, and so that, and especially the northeast of Thailand has very poor soil, so that the soil would be depleted and the forest would be gone. So it was a real loss for everything. So wanting to try to reestablish areas of nature and look after the places, and as well as expanding just the monastery itself, so that it's a bit more of a refuge for people, because that's in Thailand, and for those people who are, in Western Australia and familiar with Wat Pah Nanachat, it's a refuge for so many people, just a peaceful refuge, and having these, so that extending the boundaries of the monastery, planting forests, and I probably quadrupled the size of the monastery, and did all sorts of planting, and then got involved with other areas of of land and forests that were being protected, as well as also because the thing is, it's not just forests that you want to pay attention to. It's also the villagers need to make a living, and you want to, especially when you live in the, live in a forest, we're dependent on the village, very close contact with the local community, and you really get to know the problems that they face, and part of it is just sometimes a lack of knowledge or education or some simple resources. So that trying to introduce livelihoods that would help supplement the income, their income, and that creates a stability in the village culture that is good for everybody. And trying to get them in, and also like taking them out to different development projects and get them thinking what would work in our village, what would work in our area. And and when they're doing that, then they're able to look after the forests a lot more, because especially in the northeast of Thailand, traditionally the forests were really that was their kind of their that was their market. That was their a traditional diet or way of life in northeast of Thailand is they would plant a single rice crop, and then they would have a small gardens close to their houses with just garlic and chilies and spices and whatnot, and the rest of the food was gathered from the forest.
Right.
And so that's gone now. So then trying to introduce ways of that the villagers could be planting things in areas that would give them either supplemental income or supplemental nutrition.
That's a really interesting, like the holistic way of thinking about how everything is connected, and it's like everyone wins.
Everyone wins. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
fantastic.
Yeah, and I had good people helping me out. It wasn't just me.
Of course, yeah. I'd like to turn next to the time when you're invited to join Ajahn Amaro as co-abbot of the newly established Abhayagiri Monastery in California. How did that come about?
Well, in America, they were the group in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, had the commitment to establish a branch monastery, and they knew Ajahn Sumedho because of his connection to California. His parents were in California. He'd go back about once a year to visit them. They were elderly, and so then that was in Southern California. But he'd come up. Jack Kornfield would invite him up and to teach, and so that a group of people started to gather who wanted to have a branch monastery of Amaravati in Northern California. And Ajahn Sumedho felt he couldn't really take it on, so he designated Ajahn Amaro to do that. So Ajahn Amaro would come about about once a year, and visit the Bay Area, but visit other areas of Buddhist groups in America, trying to get a feel for what this strange thing called America was. And so people, there started to be a groups of people, and then it gets into, say, like early 90s, and say our communities in Europe were they went through a whole period of upheaval, and everybody said, let's not commit at all to the place in America. It's just too much. We've got enough on our plate already. We need to consolidate what we have and make sure our communities are stable, which is the right thing to do. And so one of the conditions was that they wouldn't start anything until they had a group of monks, at least 4, to start this new venture in America. Around that time, in the beginning of the early 90s, and some of the group from the Bay Area were also coming to Thailand, and I was getting to know them, and then which was nice. They're good. They're very sincere, solid practitioners. So that was it was inspiring to see this. And then there was a period where I went on retreat and ended up and stayed in England for a year, in Chithurst Forest for a year. Yeah. And I had already started to think in terms of, in long term of my life, I don't know that maybe I should be trying to be somewhere else and help in some other way. But it wasn't really clear in my mind. And then after being in retreat for, almost a year, then Ajahn Amaro came back from one of his trips he just spent the winter with the group in California, and he was relating what was happening and how it was going, and also one of the senior monks from Chithurst, where I was he had spent that time there, so they were saying what they're doing, and then saying how it would be, there's just, and kind of, when are we ever going to be able to get enough monks to help, and then it sort of felt, well, maybe I could help with that. And so then I approached Ajahn Amaro and said, would you like me to help out? And Ajahn Amaro, when he relates the story, he said I was talking with him, but I was very hesitant and sort of wasn't quite direct. And he said, "Oh, what's going on with Ajahn Pasanno? He's usually really straightforward." And then when I said, when it was broached the subject of maybe helping him out, he said he just about leaped up and kissed me. It's because and that was, but I said, the only thing is I don't have permission. I've got to go back to Thailand. I've got to get permission from the elders at Wat Pah. I've got to make sure that I can pass on the abbotship of Wat Nanachat. So it's not a done deal. You can't say anything until that happens. So that and he felt a lot of confidence as he went forward and developing plans to keep going, because he always felt he had this ace in the back pocket of Ajahn Pasanno ready to help out. So yeah, it ended up a wonderful collaboration between the two of us. Because I'd known Ajahn Amaro since the day he wandered into Wat Pah Nanachat as a hippie off the beach.
I'd like to ask about, what was it like establishing a forest monastery with strict vinaya of the forest tradition in the rather more libertarian, if not libertine, California of the 1990s?
Yes, I mean, it's an interesting juxtaposition.
It's different from Northeast Thailand.
But the thing is how do you say, it's strict, but it's not unreasonable, and there's an integrity and clarity there that I think inspires a trust in people, because that's, it's also at a time when, and of course continuing into, just how many spiritual communities had been just torn apart by fundamental lack of precepts and integrity. So we were the new guys on the block, but there was a certain pull there that was trusted. They might not even like it sometimes, but at least it could be, okay, they're doing something here that's special, that's different.
Even though Abhayagiri Monastery is not near a major city, there has been plenty of interest from both lay people and from those wishing to ordain. What do you credit for the successful establishment phase of Abhayagiri Monastery?
Well, I just think the clarity of the teachings, clarity of the lifestyle. It's clear. We are what we say we are. That helps. And we can't really be more than that. But it's really good to not be less than that. And that, I think it engenders a certain trust and interest, and there is a fidelity to the Thai for it's, there's obviously, because we're in the West and we're in America, there's certain adaptations that one needs to make, in the same way that say at the Bodhiyan, Ajahn Brahm and the community there's adaptations that are made, but there's a fidelity to the tradition from Thailand and the greater Buddhist tradition from the time of the Buddha. So it's founded on Vinaya. And the teachings are not, hopefully not straying from the Buddha's word too far.
Yeah. Oh, out of interest, how many monastics are there at Abhayagiri right now?
Right now, we've just had a little bit of an exodus of monks. So starting a movement, but there's about 15, about 15, and then there's 3 postulants in training and a novice continuing the training.
Yeah, it's going very well. During your time in the United States, how do you think the knowledge and practice of Buddhism has changed?
Well, personally, I think it's really maturing a lot. Of course, there's America. You can't say one thing about America. I mean, it's just everything.
That's true.
It's a real mishmash. But the people that are drawn to Abhayagiri are the people that I come into contact with. There's a maturity that I see, and a sincerity that is really, really quite wonderful, and people are getting like say today in the monastery, there's I think I'm not 100% sure. There's a brother and sister came to spend a few days in the monastery, which, I mean, there's always people coming to stay and coming and going. and I think she's maybe 18 and the brother's 16, 17, and they're already practicing Buddhism and want to come up here. And it's just to me, that's amazing. And so there's a range of people, a range of ethnicities, a range of ages, people coming to practice, and they, I mean, we don't advertise. I mean, people show up because they've heard of us or they've tracked us down through our website, through YouTube channel, and then they show up here.
In 2018, you stepped away from the role of abbot of Abhayagiri, passing the role on to Ajahn Karunadhammo and Ajahn Ñāṇiko. Both of these monks are American and have mostly trained in the United States and indeed mostly at Abhayagiri. I wanted to ask you how you feel about this milestone and what do you think it signifies for Buddhism in the US in general, that you can now be transferring leadership to monks who have trained mostly in the US?
I'm really happy about that. I think it's a real sign of the maturing of Dhamma here and Buddhism here in America, that such a thing is taking place, and I think it bodes well for the future. So that, just having the homegrown, and that's kind of been, Abhayagiri has you were so far away from everything that we have had some Thai monks come, but not so many, and it's not so easy for them. And we have had some monks from time to time, say from England, who come and spend some time, but the vast majority have all been monks who have begun their training here and have continued. And we try to send people out as part of their training to have the experience of being in other monasteries, whether it's in Europe or in Thailand, and it's very heartening that most of them want to come back and help out here.
Coming now to the end of the interview, Ajahn, you've lived a life dedicated to the spiritual quest of a Buddhist monk. What advice would you give to someone who's starting out on the Eightfold Path and who may have an interest in ordaining as a monk or nun?
Well, I mean, I say if you've got an interest, go for
it. Simple advice.
Simple advice.
Simple advice. I mean, just don't think about it too much. Don't try to find the perfect monastery. Don't try to find the perfect teacher. Just try this out, try that out, try that place out, and see what feels like a fit. But as I said, don't think that there's going to be some perfect place somewhere with a perfect teacher where all you need to do is go there and then you'll full awakening will be bestowed on you. It's not how it works. It's like Ajahn Chah sort of saying, people looking for the perfect place. It's like a turtle with a mustache.
You're just never going to find it.
Never going to find one. You're looking for a turtle with a mustache. You're never going to find it. But you have to keep putting the attention on the practice and the training, the inner reflection, the inner contemplation, and also, I think one of the things that's really important, because especially in Western culture, we're such a success and failure oriented culture but more measuring one's development, not in terms of some idea or ideal of success, but just how does it feel? Do I feel more comfortable? Do I feel more happy in myself? Do I feel more peaceful? Are there more skillful and beneficial qualities arising in me? That's what one wants to be cultivating. And sometimes that's difficult, and sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's quick, sometimes it's slow. One really has to be patient with the process.
That's very wise advice. Thank you, Ajahn, for taking the time to join us on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And best wishes.
Wonderful talking with you. Yes, and best wishes to you.
And thank you to all our listeners for joining us for this inspiring episode of Treasure Mountain, in which we heard about the spiritual path of Ajahn Pasanno. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I'd appreciate it if you could share this episode with your friends or other people who could benefit from its sage advice. And don't forget to click the follow button on your podcast app so you get the latest episodes turning up in your stream. The Treasure Mountain podcast is part of the Everyday Dhamma Network. You can find out more about Treasure Mountain podcast by going to the link in the show notes for this episode. You can also find out on the Treasure Mountain website information about all the previous episodes and guests, as well as transcriptions of our interviews. And if you go back to the everydaydhamma.net homepage, you can discover more about the 3 other podcasts on the network and links to subscribe to any and all of them as well. I hope you'll join us again on our next episode of the Treasure Mountain podcast as we seek for the treasure within.